Hey there, my name is Alexis, and I'm going to show you how I made this basking cover for my turtle tank. And it also includes a ramp and a platform. I'm going to show you how I bend the plexiglass to make the ramp, as well as how I made the framing to hold the plexiglass pieces all together, along with some tips and techniques, as well as some mistakes I learned along the way. So before making this, I went online to the site where I picked up my other basking cover that I bought a couple years ago, and they were charging $300 for that. And I didn't think it was worth it, honestly, because the one that I got from them before have these gaps along the perimeter where food gets easily stuck in, and it's a pain to clean up unless you remove the whole thing off the tank. And my main reason is the ramps that they make for these are just a little too steep for my turtle. The one in this video can climb it, but my other turtle that I'm making the new basking cover for, she's much larger than him, and she had difficulty trying to climb it when she was in this tank. So I felt I was just better off making it myself. So the thickness of the plexiglass that I used was about 3/32 of an inch thick. And I first tried cutting it using a utility blade, and it worked really well. After doing a few passes over it, I then aligned the cut with the edge of a piece of wood. Then I put my straight edge over that same line, and then I gently put pressure so that it can make a perfect split. I would just say if you are going to use a utility blade, make sure you're going slow and careful with your cuts, and make sure you have full control over where your blade is cutting. Because if you do it like this, you're going to end up with a much larger cleanup later on when you remove it. Just from that 2 to 3 inch cut, it ended up going further outside of my cut line, and then I had to use pliers and my blade to cut out that excess, and then I ended up having to waste some material here and there. So if you can, I would recommend a circular saw, but a utility blade does work. Just be careful how you're cutting it and make sure you don't cut yourself, most importantly. Once the plexiglass pieces are cut to length and width, next is to cut the aluminum angles that will make up the framing of your cover. To cut the aluminum angles, I'm using a miter saw, and fortunately you can use the same blade that you would use for wood for the aluminum, so you won't be damaging your blade or anything. So for my turtle tank specifically, I'm not sure if this applies to all tanks, but mine has this lip on the inside of the top of the tank. And I'm cutting the plexiglass and the aluminum framing so that it fits inside of that lip and not directly on top and flush with the tank. And my aluminum angles will be supporting the plexiglass from both the outside and inside. So when you're figuring out what's your total length of your basking cover, make sure you account for the thicknesses of the aluminum angles as well. So to bond the aluminum with the plexiglass, I just used high strength super glue. And just make sure whatever glue you might be using, it's able to bond with metal and plastic. Also, keep in mind that the plexiglass comes with plastic film on both sides that protect it from scratches and such. So before adhering it to the aluminum, make sure you remove that film on both sides, or else it's not going to have a proper bond. I first started with installing the aluminum angles on the outside first, and then worked my way inside just to reinforce everything before I add aluminum angles on the other parts of the exposed plexiglass. So I use the flexible type of plexiglass, as you can tell from the sag over here. I don't remember why I picked that over the rigid, and they do have the rigid type for the same thickness. Maybe it was cheaper or maybe it wasn't available, but using either is fine regardless, because it's not going to be taking up a bunch of weight as long as it's strong enough to hold the basking platform and the weight of the turtle. It should be fine. So as long as you have a proper bond with the aluminum brackets that are going to be attached to the bottom of the cover, you shouldn't have any issues regarding strength, regardless if it's flexible or rigid. So here I'm attaching the aluminum angles for the base of the basking cover. This is where the angles are going to be taking up the bulk of the weight of the basking platform and the turtle. So make sure you have enough clamps properly securing the angles until the glue dries. After waiting for the glue to dry, I tested out the cover to see how much flex is still left in it, and for the most part it was gone. There was a tiny bit of flex left, and I was still contemplating whether or not to add any more angles to the top of the basking cover, since I didn't think it was really needed, but I did have some remaining, just enough to add to the longer sides of the basking cover. But later on I end up regretting not adding more to the other sides. You'll see later in the video why. The next part of the project is to make the basking platform and ramp, which I'll be using 1/4 inch rigid plexiglass for this. And I'm going to be using a jigsaw to cut the plexiglass this time because the ramp is going to be part of the platform, and the ramp needs to be narrower than the platform itself because the platform is going to be resting on the angled brackets of the basking cover. Uh, when you actually see it, it makes more sense, and it's kind of hard for me to explain it. So just take my word for it for now, and then once you see it, you'll understand. The jigsaw is going to leave a little bit of melted plexiglass residue because of the heat generated from the blade, and I used 80 grit sandpaper to smooth out some of the rougher edges produced from this residue, as well as remove any other sharp edges that may have been produced from the cut. Once the ramp has been cut out, next is to actually bend the plexiglass so that the ramp can angle downward. So I used clamps to properly secure the plexiglass, and I covered the parts that I didn't want heated with plywood, and I left about 1 or 2 inches of plexiglass exposed to have that part only bend. And I did light passes using a propane torch that's normally used for soldering copper pipes and such. From what I understood online, these types of torches tend to be a little bit too hot to use, or is not normally used for bending plexiglass, but since this is what I had on hand and what I picked up from my home center wasn't strong enough, I ended up just using this and just doing very light passes. I would recommend using a test piece to test out your torch before using it on your main piece, just so you can gauge how strong the torch is and how fast your plexiglass may bend at the speed you're using and how close you're using it. The plywood piece also kind of serves as a weight to help bring down the plexiglass as it melts down. Also, it serves as protection so that you don't have your hands in direct contact with the plexiglass. Also, I would wear protective gloves if you've never used a torch before. Once the ramp has been made, next is to create the steps for the ramp. I used the table saw to make the strips, but if you only have a circular saw, I would just recommend making the strips first before actually cutting the full plexiglass piece, so that you have more surface area to work on before needing to make the wall panels for the enclosure. To attach the strips to the ramp, I use super glue as well. I used a scrap piece of plexiglass to act as a spacer, so I have my steps evenly spaced out. And don't be silly like me and attach the strips to the ramp like this. I would have the ramp level instead of the platform being level. Because of this, I ended up making a bit of a mess with the super glue. So just keep that in mind. One thing I would recommend is I would sand the edges of the strip that's going to be exposed before attaching it to the ramp, just to save yourself some cleanup and potentially avoid scratching the ramp when you're sanding it when it's attached. So here's how the platform looks when it's inside the basking area. The sides are resting on the angle brackets, as you can see here. All I really have left to do is sand these edges of these stairs. I would sand every edge, honestly. You don't want your turtle potentially scratching themselves or cutting themselves off this. I would use around 80 grit sandpaper on the outside edge, inside edges, these edges, because sometimes my turtle will get scared when on here and will just run and slide off. So you don't want them cutting themselves in any way here. So definitely put some time into sanding your platform. So a concern that I had when using the 1/4 inch thick sheets was, since my turtle's a little bit on the heavier side, I was concerned that when she's climbing up this, that this end would actually fly up or lift up little by little because of her weight, and also because this material is a lot thinner. The store-bought one that I have is about 1/2 inch thick. I chose to use this because it's a lot cheaper, about half the price. And what I did to hopefully address this was I cut this width a little bit oversized than the inside dimension, and then I trimmed it little by little so that it comes to a point where you can actually lift this and the platform won't fly up at all. Like, it lifts a tiny bit, but it's not going to come off with I guess the force of a turtle. So I was able to address it like that. But if you were to come to this point and let's say it's really loose here and you might end up having that kind of issue, you can fix it by either using the thicker material, the 1/2 inch, and make sure it's long enough so that the weight counteracts her weight or his weight. Or if you use the thinner material, you can use angle brackets like this and just put like a small piece here and here
maybe 4 inches or 3-4 inches, so that when this comes off, that bracket will stop it from flying all the way up. As you can see here, we got some cracks. These cracks appeared because I dropped this as I was moving this around. I had to move it to the outside so I can clean the garage, and I ended up dropping it. It fell on this corner, and then this panel cracked on 2 sides, and this side cracked a little bit over here. In terms of structural stability, it's fine, but since this side had no top bracket, this was basically flexing over here a lot. So that's why I added this angled bracket on top. I didn't put in here because I don't have any more. I don't want to buy more material just to cover this, so I put this here, and no flex. As you can see, there's no flex, no structural issues. Everything is pretty sturdy. So I'm not going to worry about these cracks because for the most part, it's going to be covered. I'm going to be putting this background over here and here and here on these 3 sides. This is not going to be covered. That's where you're going to see the turtle from the outside. So you're not going to really see these cracks once it's covered up with the background wallpaper. I didn't do a good job with the paint. I forgot that these brackets here on the inside are going to stick out more, so you're going to notice these. And then since I don't like how everything was done here, I'm actually going to cover this whole thing with some black duct tape, Gorilla Tape really, just so I can cover up these edges and cover up the inside bracket here from the outside. I thought I would do a better job with the paint, and I didn't, so I'm going to cover up everything here with tape just to make it look a little bit nicer.
Because of the change in plans of using duct tape, and I hadn't accounted for the thickness of the duct tape, the fit for the cover was a little bit tighter than I would have liked, but it still fits almost perfect. But to be honest, I like how the duct tape looks. Since it's a Gorilla Tape, it looks a lot nicer, and it's also waterproof, I think, so it's also good for this kind of application. And to be honest, I think I would have used duct tape from the start of this build if I had known that it was going to be this tedious to spray paint all these aluminum angles while it was attached to the plexiglass. Although I guess you can avoid that by just painting the aluminum angles prior to bonding them with the plexiglass. Just don't get paint on the side of the aluminum angle where it's going to bond with the plexiglass, or else it's not going to have a strong bond. But yeah, considering everything, I still think this project is a success. Even with that little mishap I had with the plexiglass, it's still going to serve its purpose. I still save a lot of money, and my turtle's going to be a whole lot happier now. So thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you have any questions or comments, let me know down below. I hope you learned something. I know I did. And thanks again, and take care.